Hi, you're on the Bible Forum. I'm Warren Sprouse. We're here every Sunday night from 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern. We'd love for you to join us live. I know if you don't, a lot of folks don't, and I don't blame you. This is a Sunday night. You got things to do. But we post all this stuff on Facebook. We post everything on our website, thebibleforum.net, and it's all posted on YouTube. And people talk to me. I get stuff, comments, whatever. If there's something interesting, let me know. If there's something you want to talk about, let me know that too. And we'll see what we can do. This last year has shaped up to be a year of Trump. How are we looking at this? Well, a number of Americans are claiming that new unemployment benefits have never been so low for so long. According to the April 7th U.S. Labor Department report, the initial jobless claims decreased by 9,000 to a seasonally adjusted 233,000. This means claims now held below 300,000 for 162 consecutive weeks, cementing the longest streak for weekly records dating back to 1967. The consistent low claims or low claim levels point to labor market health because they mean relatively few Americans are losing their jobs and applying for benefits to tide them over until they can find new employment. And all the liberals and the progressives can do is complain. It's an amazing process. The Los Angeles Public Works Committee is asking the state for an Environmental Quality Act waiver. For what? To accelerate the construction of something called Hyperloop tunnels. Now, I don't think I've ever seen these before, but in looking for pictures of it, I've seen stuff like it. But what they are underground electric sleds. The elevators move your car down to the tunnel where it is placed on these electric sleds. Now, I'm thinking every car on an independent, but they show great big machine type things. You drive your car in, there may be 25, 30 cars in one of these sleds, and it is whisked across town at speeds in excess of 100 miles an hour. This is the brainchild of, wait for it, Elon Musk. You ever heard of him? Shot thing up in the air. This invention will move people and or their cars, because you can get in without your car, through the tunnels at these tremendous speeds. The first test run was completed a year ago this month, April 2017, and plans are already made to build a tunnel from New York to Washington. And you say, well, what's driving this? And I would ask you, what planet do you live on? 4 million residents trying to get into a 2 million car parking spot. I mean, that's what's going on here. We have cars in our cities everywhere. I have driven charter bus in downtown New York City, Manhattan, at Christmas time. I know traffic. Got nothing on Charleston. And I've seen pictures from LA. And I have driven through Atlanta. I mean, I've been to some place, Birmingham. I've been to some places and I see the cars. Around here, people complain all the time that the city parents, the leaders, are approving the development of apartment complexes or housing developments, but they're not doing anything for the infrastructure. We got a road out here that's 4 lanes wide. It's only 10 years old. It was 2 lanes 10 years ago. They made it into 4 lanes. And people who lived here through this tell me it is every bit as crowded now as it was when they decided they had to expand it. This is the kind of thing that's driving Elon Musk. He sees dollars. We can put people in these things and whoosh them onto the other side of Los Angeles, or even from New York to Washington, D.C., or who knows where. We'll take all those smoke-belching vehicles off the road, and we'll put them where they're supposed to be in a very short amount of time. Because people are threatening to move. They're going to move out of LA, they're going to move out of New York, going to get away, or moving out, away from these. And the experts tell us the cost of living is suffering as a result. 73% of millennials have a close friend or family member considering moving away because of the cost of living. Stay tuned. It's going to be interesting. I don't think anybody in the world knows what's going to happen between Russia and the United States in terms of our relationship. It gets a little frosty, it gets a little hectic, and then it kind of backs off. And then Syria comes in and there's gas in the kids, and then Israel's in there bombing, and we send stuff over there, and Russia. But now we're backing off again. In the wake of last week or so's attack on Syria's gas factories and the development of gas factories and the launching points and all the stuff, we're being told that the United States is set to impose new sanctions on Russia because it supposedly, probably, supported Bashar Assad in his effort to control his critics, and has used gas on more than one occasion. And according to our U.S. ambassador, Nikki Haley, they've been in there thick as thieves, and Russia said okay to this. She said the international community is telling Russia that either you make a decision on how you act and when you act, or the rest of us will make a decision in isolating you. Did I tell you she was a governor here in South Carolina? I like to take her home. She is tough. She said, we deployed 105 weapons against the 3 targets that will impact the Syrian regime's ability to develop, deploy, and use chemical weapons in the future. That according to the Marine Corps and the Joint Chiefs of Staff and all the rest of it. They described the facilities as fundamental components of the regime's chemical warfare infrastructure. Now, the news just a few days ago, our president says we will not impose sanctions on Russia. Leading up to that, we're going to sanction you, we're going to sanction you, and they go, okay, and we're not going to do it. Is that the art of the deal? I really don't know. It's a little hectic for me. Members of Canada's Liberal Party are meeting this week at their national convention in Halifax. On the agenda is a proposal to treat drug abuse as a health issue and to expand treatment and harm reduction services and to reclassify low-level drug possession and consumption as administrative violations. Why? Well, because Canada is now enjoying an opioid crisis. Lawmakers are desperate to find alternate solutions to incarceration. Opioid crisis. Apparently they're locking people up so fast they're running out of places to put them. Now, some advocates are suggesting that Canada follow Portugal's lead. Portugal decriminalized all drug use in 2001. What happened there? Well, drug use has gradually fallen to the second lowest rate of drug-induced deaths in European Union. If you're caught with drugs, these folks are ordered to appear before a dissuasion commission, and they can either be referred to treatment or given administrative sanctions. And these advocates, They really believe that one has to do with the other. And there are people like me who would like to go to Canada, sit down with them and say, do you not know what drugs are? I think the old saying comes into play here. You can get statistics to support almost anything. When you are allowing people the freedom to just use any kind of an addictive sort of drug, a drug that will actually kill you, they're not going to use less of it. Well, in Portugal they did. Okay, well, I don't know how all of this works out, but I don't think it's going to work. What'd you learn in church? You're 50 years old. You've raised your children, perhaps, or maybe you're 30 years old. I don't know. But when you were growing up in your parents' house and you went to church, what'd you learn? Now, we talk about this sort of thing every once in a while, but here's a guy who wrote an article about it. He said, well, I did the math. I spent more than 600 hours in church as I was growing up. But by the time I left home, this is all I really understood about Christianity. People go to heaven or hell, depending on whether or not they believe in Jesus. Time out. That is only 1/3 of the churches in America. Huge number of so-called Christian churches don't teach that. None of the cults teach that. None of the religious groups teach that stuff. He went to a good church, no doubt. He also learned that once you accept Jesus, you're saved. He learned that Christians need to be as good as possible and not sin, just to be forgiven. He learned it's important to tell others about Jesus so they can be saved too. What's the result? Well, the result, he says, is I lived the next 12 years with an incredibly blah, shallow faith. It might be argued he didn't have any faith at all. But he says, I didn't actually lose my faith. Trust me, biblically speaking, if it's there and it's a God thing, you can't lose it. Anyway, I didn't actually lose my faith, as do more than 2/3 of other kids who grow up going to church. But he says it was hanging by a thread. Now, where did those 600 plus hours of Christian education go? How can it be, he asks, that so many kids spend this kind of time in church and don't leave home with much more understanding of Christianity than could be taught in a week at church camp? He doesn't offer an answer, but you know the answer. We're playing at church. We bring the kids in, the parents, the family. We separate them. The little ones go here, the teenagers go there, the parents go here. They all get something different. He was taught that you need to be as good as possible and not sin if you wanted to be forgiven. That's backwards. That's absolutely backwards. There isn't anything you can do to be forgiven. Jesus did it all. You need to repent, turn your back literally on sin as a concept, not just the individual things you know about, and embrace with all your heart and soul. Believe is a very strong word in the Bible, that what Jesus did was sufficient for your sin. And if that dynamic is working, the Spirit of God is the one who's pushing all those parts around. If that's working in your heart and in your life, there will be a change internally. And from that point on, you won't want to do all these other things. It's not the rules and the regulations. It's the want to. How do you want to? There was an article this week that indicated that women are dying because Democrats are losing elections. U.S. Representative and Vice Chairman of the Democrat National Committee. Notice I say Democrat, not Democratic. There's nothing democratic about the Democrat National Committee. His name is Keith Ellison. We talked about him 10 or 12 years ago when he first got elected to the House of Representatives. He took his oath of office with the Quran over in a liberal church. Anyway, Keith Ellison said at a progressive training session in Washington, D.C. last week that women are dying because Democrats are losing elections. Why? Well, because the maternal mortality rates indicate that. You say, what? Yeah, mothers are dying now, not the babies, he says. And that's a problem. Especially, he says, in Missouri and Texas, which are red states. But here's the rest of the story. According to the Kansas City Star in Missouri, which has one of the highest maternal mortality rates in the country, most of the women are dying from cardiac issues and blood clots. Why? Well, because of the high rate of women in the state who smoke or are obese. Many of these women increase their risk of developing diabetes or heart problems. Has nothing to do with Republicans. While over in Texas, most women die from receiving inadequate clinical care. Ellison made these claims about maternal mortality rates a month after he urged Democrats to support single-payer health care. You know what that is, right? It's what the British have. The British are going to let the baby die, even though the parents could probably get the money and take them someplace else and maybe fix it. They're going to let them die again because that's national health care. Ellison wants us to be in that boat. I say so much for honesty, integrity, and moral character. Are you lonely? You don't need to be lonely if you have a smartphone. How often do you use your smartphone? You see them around. Maybe you're one of them. Every time things slow down and there isn't something you need to be doing, on the phone. It's epidemic proportion. Well, apparently digital addiction can result in many negative mental effects on people over time. Who knew? Recent research even found it creates a brain imbalance in children. Now, a new study finds that over-attachment to your phone can cause serious social problems, boosting feelings of loneliness and isolation, all the while worsening anxiety and depression. Are you shocked? Are you surprised? What is wrong with parents who actually believe their 8-year-old needs a phone? Well, I have to be in control. I have to know what's going on. Why don't you know? When I did this show in Wilmington, North Carolina, I was on the radio. I can't remember whether it was the Bible Forum that I was doing on Sunday nights or the stint that I did during the week on regular kinds of things. But I remember a man called me and he took exception to my concept that children didn't need phones. This is at least 10 years ago. And his argument was, well, if there's a bomb threat in the school, or there's a shooter in the school, or there's a fire, or there's something going on, my child needs to get a hold of me. I need to know. And I asked him, I said, what makes you think that if you did get a phone call, that the authorities will let you anywhere within spitting distance of that building? You wouldn't get within 3 city blocks of that school. Yeah, but I need to know. There's nothing you can do. And while your child has that phone, you don't know what they're doing. It doesn't make sense. Well, it makes sense to millennials. It doesn't make sense to baby boomers. Well, maybe it does. I don't know. It doesn't make sense to me on any level. You know Piers Morgan, British guy, was on, what was he, on CNN, or I forget where he was. But he's a liberal. He makes no bones about it. Well, Piers Morgan recently declared, quote, I have a real problem with this whole opting out of gender, being gender fluid. I have a problem with that. Waking up one day and thinking you want to be whatever you feel like? He says if we allow everyone to self-identify, is that not damaging to society? Oh yeah, the left went crazy. That kind of free speech cannot be permitted. It's somehow healthy to endure the public shame, the outcry over this acting out like your opposite gender, to risk serious damage to your sexual organs, not to mention disease and deformity. But to actually say this whole thing about gender bending is damaging, well, that's just not acceptable. We're going to talk a little bit about this sort of thing later on in the show as we look at religious belief and the beliefs that have been at work against us since, well, almost from the beginning. No, it's not atheism. Stay tuned.